It sounds like a lot of people can hear us. So thank you everybody for joining us today. This is another edition of our Traction and Boast webinar series. In this one, we are talking about how to access the $26 billion Canadian grant funding market. That's 26 billion. That number always blows my mind. The hard part is how do we get it? So we have a special guest in here for today, Stephanie, who's going to go through some of her expertise on the grant market and help us share secrets on how to get it. So I'll let Stephanie introduce herself first, and I'll go after.
Yeah, so I'm Stephanie Sang. Some people know me in Vancouver. I'm based in Vancouver as the Grant Angel. And so what Granted does, a company I started 8 years ago, is we help businesses access grant funding programs by way of hiring grants, training grants, and market expansion programs so that they can grow efficiently and effectively.
Fantastic. And I'm Russ Armstrong. I am the head of business development Eastern Canada for Boast.ai. We are actually a SR&ED consultant. We are automating the SR&ED claim process. So building software to make it cheaper, faster, and better for our clients to access one of the most popular grant programs in Canada. I was a co-founder of Limelight Platforms previously, and I was telling Stephanie I was lucky enough to capture about $1.2 billion or $1.2 million in government grant money myself when I was running Limelight. So I have some expertise in applying to a bunch of the different grants also.
Yeah, and so what's really interesting, Russ, is hearing a little bit of your experience with it. And you mentioned also that a good portion of what you applied for was SR&ED tax credits. What we will do today is give you a full gamut of what's available on the government side of things. And so, yeah, we're excited to get going on it. So I call my section Grants 101. This will go quickly because we've only got 20 minutes each. We want to make sure that we make time for all of your questions. But let's start with a story. $100,000. Now, back in the day, that probably wasn't, people were really scrambling to get this. Nowadays, $100,000 doesn't get you that far. But that is the number of grants that we had received as a boutique consulting firm in Vancouver over the last 3 years. And so it's just to say, and I know that we have a range of different audience members today, where you might be startup, you might be in the growth stage, or you might be in a mature business stage right now, but that funding is really available to all businesses. And so the story that I have is really in terms of how we were able to access it. And I think the major misnomer that people have is that, oh, so it's $100,000, it's one application and that's it. And the reality is it's actually not like that. A lot of the grant programs that most businesses can leverage that are industry agnostic are going to be ones that you add in, $10,000 or $15,000 for a hiring grant, and then you do it again 6 months later. You might get some training funds for something, and then you're going to do some collaborative R&D with a partner from another country, or you're expanding into new marketplaces. So this dollar amount of $100,000 was really based on hiring and training grants. In the next couple of years, we expect to be able to double or triple that for our organization because we are, leveraging technology, which is what Boast has also done. But we are, working on technology projects that could be further funded through innovation programs in the future. So I just wanted to put this up here to say, it's not a huge amount, but it's definitely money that's in your pocket that then you can use to, whether it's investing in something else or expanding into new marketplaces, it's money that you can then put into doing more and better for your company. So the agenda is really simple. These are kind of the three things that a lot of organizations will come and ask us. So I thought I would cover those in the presentation today. So initially, I could go through top 10 mistakes and all this other stuff, but generally I'm just going to pick 3 how to fail. So nobody really wants to know, always how you succeed. It's really like, what did you do that, was an error on one side or another? And we hear of these mistakes from clients who come to us. We hear of them from, prospects who have tried grants before. And some of these mistakes we've made, we're human. And so even though our success rate is high, our success rate is 92%, there have been failures. That 8% failure, we'll go through a couple of those examples. And then how to succeed, right? So, okay, we know down in the dumps, I didn't get a grant. I don't want to apply for it again. No, let's learn how can we ensure that you're more successful. And then we'll talk about available grants and how to find them. So I'll give you some resources. I would have taken you through like each province, but I think we just have a range of different clients here. Instead, I'll give you a free trial to the platform that we have, and you guys can find the grants that are most relevant to your business in our platform. So how to fail. Let's start with that. Really, a big part of it is reading government jargon and not understanding it. And I will say, sidebar story, that this is an area that I find most organizations really just don't have expertise in or want to build expertise in. So when I was younger, my mom worked at CRA. And I don't see, like, there's a smile on Russ's face because you know when you have a parent that works at CRA, it's like audit for everything, right? And so my mom worked at CRA, and I started working part-time when I was 14. And she said, okay, here's your tax guide, and you can read through that and figure out how to do your own tax return. And I said, okay, that's really interesting. And I literally was flipping through. I don't know if you guys have seen these tax guides because I know they're online now. So I'm going to age myself a little bit. But this tax guide is about 4 inches thick. And the paper is like rice paper. It's like super thin. And so I'm flipping through this, looking for tax credits and benefits and all this other stuff. And I'm like, hey, look at this, Mom. I got this child tax benefit. It's like, what is that? I'm like, well, it's for people who take care of kids, and I'm a kid and I'm taking care of myself, so I qualify for this tax benefit, right? And so, just as a very simple story of how, obviously at the age of 14, what do you know? But I really kind of misunderstood the entire purpose of it because everything was written in government speak. So understanding a little bit more of government jargon, it comes with experience. Like as you look through it and you read one and then you read another, it's something that you absolutely could build up. And then the second failure point is often follow through, which is crazy. I mean, because you're dealing with the government, and these are government grants that we work on. We don't work on foundational or nonprofit grants. But then you get the grant and you go and apply for it. And now you've got to do whatever's necessary to make the claim back. And people will, it's almost like they got that approval and they're happy about it, and then they don't want to follow through. And so the challenge is kind of like, I'm a parent. So if my kid asks me, hey, Mom, can you give me $50 for something? I'm like, okay, what are you going to buy? It's like, oh, I'm going to buy a bunch of books. It's like, okay. So then I go and, I give him $50, and he comes back with a video game. There's no way after, that experience that I would give him $50 again, right? Because the follow through, like, what is it that is the government's giving you funding for? See the government a little bit like a parent. So what are they giving you funding for? Are you addressing any of the government documentation and reports that they need? Are you making the claims properly? And actually, are you following through with the things that they gave you funding for? So super important. This failure point could lead you to a blacklist. Okay, so you want to make sure, and they don't call it a blacklist because they're government, but you do want to make sure that funding that you've been awarded, even if you don't use it all, that you tell them what happened with it and why you're not using it all, so that you're not creating an issue for yourself when you want to apply for this program the next run. And then incomplete applications. So this is really interesting to me. I spoke to someone who completed a, CanExport or, one of these larger market expansion programs. And there were sections and gaps when she sent me the application. She filled it out herself and she just wanted a second opinion on it. And I went, why didn't you fill this part out? And she's like, oh, well, I don't really know which customers we're going to go and see. That's a discovery process that we're asking for funding for, so we can go out there and find these customers. Okay, well, this is not like writing an exam. You can't just get 80 points and be like, okay, it's a B. You have to fill everything out. You got to make sure that everything is complete and that you are addressing the things that they need. If they're asking for a list of clients that you're going to go and visit, you have to have a list of clients that you're going to go visit. Whether or not those meetings take place is a separate thing. But if you don't put it down, they're going to assume that you have 0 leads. And so why should they give you $75,000 to go and expand into a new marketplace where you have 0 leads? It's just very dangerous for the government to do stuff like that. And as taxpayers in this room today, virtual room today, I'm going to say that they're stewards of public funding, the grantors are, and so they have to protect what we are putting money into. And so I'm sure you can appreciate that as a taxpayer. And then the last one on how to fail is being not in the know. So I got this recently from a bunch of clients and that were transitioning over into a different level of service. And the response was, oh, well, grants aren't a priority for me right now. And I went, that's almost telling me that like free money is not something that you would take if it was offered to you. That's literally how I feel about people making statements like that. And so I'll give you a really easy example. There used to be a program in 2013, no, maybe 2014 and 2015, and it was called the DTAP program. And it helped businesses invest in technology, invest buying, implementing, getting training for technology that they would use for their business, and grow their kind of reliance on technology so that they don't do things manually anymore. It's an efficiency play on the government part. Okay, that funding program was previously issued by IRAP, and it was up to $50,000, a 50% share on cost. So if you're implementing a CRM system, an ERP system, a payroll system, accounting system, whatever, you could actually apply for funding potentially to help cover some of the costs. That's pretty amazing. That funding went unused, so they closed it. And so for those organizations who come to me and go, you know what, it's not a priority right now. And I kind of go, okay, well, that's fine. But then you're investing, I don't know, $20,000 to buy ClickFunnels or Salesforce, $80,000 implementation. You're essentially saying like, okay, we're not going to take this funding. And so if you're not taking it, then your competitors are, or other businesses are. And so being not in the know means that you are potentially missing opportunities, or you've started an activity because you didn't know. You go, hey, I'm going to do my research on January the 2nd, and I just hired someone on, and they are starting on January the 3rd. And so I find a grant, and I'm like, oh, perfect. Then I'm like, I'll just do it at the end of this week. And it's really clear. You have to apply, get approved before you can bring someone on. And that's a case with a lot of different programs. Some will have exceptions, but starting activity and then trying to retroactively get funding for it, with the exception of SR&ED, is one of these things where it's a little bit more challenging. So please keep yourselves informed on different grant opportunities that are available out there. So how to succeed. Understanding what the company requirements are for each grant is going to be pretty important. So things like, maybe you have to be in business for at least a year or two. Maybe it's just you have to be registered. Maybe you can be a sole prop or a general partnership and still qualify for funding. So we put incorporation date here because I'm sure most of the audience accessing SR&ED or wanting to access SR&ED, you guys are incorporated, so we put that there, but it could just be a registration date. And then understanding that grants, although it is quote unquote free money, it does require a little bit of there's a lag time between when you get approved and when you can actually collect on that first check. So make sure that you have the financial resources and the revenues to be able to facilitate the cost of essentially banking up what is owed to you and then make a claim for it. And then the other thing is understanding what's grantable. So we're going to go to this next slide because for sure, I get questions about this all the time. This is the mother slide, okay? If you guys are gonna, look at anything in the presentation, it should be this size. I would recommend you guys print it off. So there's a variety of different things. I'm just gonna point out a few things on the eligible activities and ineligible. The rest of it you can look at on your own. So eligible expenses, if you're looking at a hiring grant, wages are included. But if you're looking at market expansion, it's an ineligible expense often. Okay, so we're going to use the bell curve of 80-20 and just ensure that you know what we're talking about is not across the board, but take a look at that. So just keep in mind that it's not just salaries. Yeah, the government's going to support it. It does depend on the type of activity. The key thing you also need to understand is right in the middle of the slide, right under ineligible expenses and market expansion, is capital expenditures, land or equipment. And you'll see it again in quality systems. You don't get funding for things, and I think SR&ED is a case as well now, for capital expenditures or leasehold improvements. Are there loans that the government will give you? Absolutely. There are absolutely programs for that. But they're loans, they're not grants. And so keep in mind that as a taxpayer, that makes a lot of sense. Why should, they give Russ $100,000 to buy 3 new Tesla trucks, and then not give me any money to, pay for rent? And so same thing, it really is making sure that organizations understand what is grantable and what's not grantable. Again, for training, I think some of you guys have probably leveraged the employer training grant or a Canada Jobs grant. They've been flip-flopping sometimes between the different conferences that are eligible, whether training outside of Canada is eligible. So just keep in mind that every province will have its different rules for some of these federal programs, especially if they're run provincially. But generally, this is a really good slide for you guys to have on hand, okay? And then we go to, so a little bit more of a story in terms of like where companies can miss out. So we're looking at hiring someone and we're going to be paying them, it's an entry level position, $40,000 to start, and we could potentially get 50% of their wages covered up to $15,000. So the grant amount there would be $15,000. I'm just going to walk you through kind of like a little bit of a case study. This could be any company, okay? I did put R&D and quality systems in here because understanding the audience is probably a little bit more tech, but there have been situations like our company, we applied for $30,000 of funding through hiring just this year alone, 2 positions that were associated with our technology product, and we got $30,000 from there. Training grant, so whether you get technology training, it could be 80% in BC, it's about 66% in other provinces as well, but that's a good chunk. Think of all the things that leadership, management, communication, change management, technical skills like coding, SEO, social media, accounting, whatever it is that you need, equipment training, things that you need to be able to train your staff on, leverage your training grants for that. Market expansion, so taking your products outside of Canada, unless you are in food processing, there might be stuff within Canada, but largely 90% of the program is going to be like, hey, export. You guys have probably heard of the Can Export program and the different streams that program has as well. So you can get, I put 67.5% because some programs are 50-50 matching. Other programs are 75%. So I just took what's in the middle. And then R&D, I didn't even start thinking about SR&ED tax credits. This was like IRAP, NSERC, any of these ones that you're doing some applied research. I mean, I'm sure Russ could probably add another 100 G's on there. So it doubles, right? What you could get over the course of 1 year. And then quality systems, and that would be for organizations where maybe it's an electrical improvement or something like that within your organization, within your facility. So keep in mind that there's, small funding dollars associated with that. So where do you find these grants? Very easy. Innovate Canada has a grant portal /app. It's on a iOS app or an Android app right now. It's also available on a web-based app. And so I would take a look at it. I would be really careful to rely heavily on this portal simply because it's a federal app. So whether or not it has all the provincial grants in there and how updated it is, it's, a little bit bureaucratic. So you just gotta, click through it and then just make sure you dive a little bit deeper before you assume that the information on there is totally correct. I would go click through each of the links. And the good thing about it is it gives you a nice little summary and then you click through a link. But then the bad thing about it, in my opinion, is that it doesn't give you Cole's notes of things. So you have to still read through the 40-page application guide to get what it is that you need. Take a look at your provincial sites. Every province is gonna have different provincial programs, the federal government sites, depending on your industry. So if you're in agri-food, then you should go to Agri-Food Canada and look at what's available there. Join different mailing lists. I know you guys probably heard of this webinar through the BOST mailing list or from the granted mailing list. So make sure you guys stay on these mailing lists so you get information about different grants. Your industry associations and some of these business organizations will also sometimes be notified of grant programs. Again, the timing of that might be a little bit lagged because by the time they can announce it and then they can fit it into their new newsletter, it could be like a month or two off. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay, but lots of opportunities there. And then the last one is Get Granted, which is the technology that we have created, which matches government grant programs to organizations in Canada, but largely Western Canada. So the opportunity is to be updated by email when there's a grant that matches your profile. So this is our kind of play on grants, which is separate from Innovate Canada, but we kind of make sure that the system that we built really speaks to the needs of businesses. So really briefly, helping you save time with the right list of grants, making sure that you can apply confidently with videos as well as best practices that we've gained over the last 8 years in our organization, and then getting those notifications and having a dashboard to keep track of where you're at on the granting process. So I think we're at 20 minutes, Russ.
Nice, well done.
Yes, we will. I'll answer any questions you guys might have. We're going to let Russ go now. So feel free to put in the public chat bot any questions that you may have. We'll go through those. But yeah, this was fun. It was quick and fun. And now Russ will tell you where the rest of the free money is.
Not the rest of the free money, but one of the most popular programs. Thanks, Stephanie. Awesome. Thank you. So kind of quick overview. I mean, from my perspective, as I mentioned, I was a startup founder myself, and we took advantage of every program we possibly could. We were going after grants as small as like $3,000 all the way up to my largest refund I got back on the SR&ED program was over $500,000 on a single grant. So really, we went after everything we could. We were trying to be as capital efficient as possible. And there's a ton of different programs out there, but you do have to be diligent about it. As Stephanie said, you have to be in the know. You have to know when to apply, how to apply, and stay on top of it to get this free money. And if you are in the know, getting this money is a lot easier than chasing it and always being counterintuitive to try and find it after the fact. So I'm going to jump through and go through the SR&ED program. I'm sure many people have heard about it. It is a super popular program. I joined Boast about a year ago and helped open the Toronto office, and we've grown considerably over the last year. We're now over 70 clients in Toronto, a team of 12 people. So we've been expanding rapidly out this way. We're building some cool software to actually try and automate the SR&ED claim process. So tying into tech stacks and extrapolating some of the data from like your Jira, your code repos like Git and Bitbucket to help automate the claim process to reduce some of the friction that a lot of people have about the time it takes to complete these claims. So that's a little bit about Boast. So I'll just jump into the program a little bit more. Before I get there, what we're trying to do with this software is produce larger refunds for less time, reduce your audit risk. And we're partnering with a whole bunch of partners across Canada to work on this initiative. So a little bit about SR&ED. It is a massive, massive program. In 2018, over 25,000 companies in Canada got over $3.5 billion back from the government. So absolutely massive. And you can get up to 64% as a cash back. If you're a Canadian-controlled private corporation, you can get up to 64% cash back from the government after you file your taxes. So it comes back to you on your notice of assessment after you filed your T2 every year. So a massive program. So a little bit deeper into that, if you are a CCPC, up to 64% of salaries, 32% of subcontractors, and up to 42% of those materials you spend against that. The key to understanding this is a refund against the taxes spent. So think about, you need to have a T4 or a proof of that salary being paid in Canada as a refund against that. Same with your subcontractors. You need to be paying your provincial taxes to get a refund against those taxes paid. So if they're offshore developers or offshore contractors, they are not going to qualify for the program. But as you can imagine, if you're getting 64 cents on the dollar back and you have a team in Canada, it is quite beneficial, and it actually reduces your cost of your dev team having them in Canada. Not to mention some of the other benefits you have from the increased dev velocity to more transparency across the team. So lots of benefits from onshoring your dev team with this program. You just kind of have to understand the ins and outs of it. If you're a non-CCPC, pretty much you chop those in half. You're still eligible. Some of it comes back in a non-refundable way, so it would be an offset of future tax liability. The details of it are a little bit finer, but different provinces will still have a cash level that they'll give back, and at a federal level, it will just be a non-refundable tax grant. I probably imagine most people on the program or on the call today would be in the Canadian-controlled private corporation. So what is the qualifying criteria? Like, what is SR&ED? What does that actually mean? So the easiest way to think about it is development, software development that is outside of standard practices. So pushing the envelope on what you're doing. And the easiest way to think about this is more from the above. The technological uncertainty that's available, you have to go through a systematic investigation process of having a hypothesis, testing that hypothesis, some iterations around it, and then producing some outcomes that lead to technological advancements for the Canadian economy. So it's about creating jobs and it's about creating technological advancements, but it must be kind of in this area where you're pushing the boundaries of technological innovation. So the technological uncertainty, I'll just touch on this really quickly. What you need to have here is, due diligence from your team who are searching for answers that not are available to them, either in open source libraries or as a software available that you can third-party license. It needs to be something that you are developing in the context of your company. And what the context of your company means, there might be competitors out there that are using similar technologies, but because they're proprietary to that company, you can do that work in-house and also qualify for the program as long as it's not publicly available in open source or in a licensable technology solution that you could leverage. So some quick examples of what that might be in terms of technological uncertainty. I'll just go down to the example right here. So if you're running algorithms and you're having scalability issues with your platform, or your response times are really weak, or you're not hitting performance targets for your algorithms, or your accuracy targets are off, any enhancements that you're making to those would generally qualify for SR&ED. Trying to figure out which algorithm or design methodology will satisfy your technical objectives and all the research that goes into that before you start coding. Those are all things that qualify for the SR&ED program. Or if you're using an open source framework X and you're trying to solve a problem, but you have to make a bunch of modifications to it because in its out-of-the-box solution, it is not adequate enough to solve your problem. These are all things that qualify for the SR&ED program. I know I get a lot of questions from people that this is very, detailed in terms of it. That's why people hire consultants on the SR&ED industry, because there is a very high level of knowledge and sophistication that goes into actually building out these claims. That's why consultants exist like Boast, to help you kind of comb through the work that you're doing and build out a narrative around your technological advancement and build out a claim for you based off of that. From a systematic investigation part, and this is getting pretty deep into it, but pretty much the basis of this is it needs to be done by qualified personnel. So generally saying that you need to have someone who's not a co-op or has, a couple of years experience. They need to be qualified personnel to be able to doing this, and not just someone who is learning basic coding for the first time. In technological advancement, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, though. It's really about advancing the company's knowledge base in order to address the technical uncertainty. So why is it so difficult to capture your SR&ED throughout the year? Well, the problem is it's very backwards looking. Generally, it's dollars spent, and then at the end of the year, people go backwards and they look at all the work they did over the course of the year and try and figure out what it is. Boast takes a little bit of a different approach to SR&ED, whereas we integrate our systems early, we set up user access, and we actually help coach and build out documentation throughout the course of the year, so it's not as backwards looking. So with your technical documentation, you need dates, timestamps to see what people were working on that needs to be attributed to the actual documented work that they have. This can be done through like Jira and Jira story points, where it's actually tracking some of the work that they're doing. It can even go as detailed as having like some of the add-ins onto it for time tracking throughout the year. So for your technical documentation, these need to be like at a monthler granularity with major technological challenges and setbacks encountered by the team. So it's about documenting these, and best practices for doing this is around if you're running an agile sprint methodology and if you're doing it on your post-mortems. So every 2 weeks, you can sit down and go through some of these challenges and obstacles that the team met, document them, document the time spent on those. If you're doing it every 2 weeks, then you're going to have a full set of documentation that you'll need to apply for SR&ED at the end of the year. I'm going to skip over the time tracking because it's not as interesting at this point, but the deadlines kind of are. So just touching on deadlines a little bit. So as I mentioned, the SR&ED program is filed with your T2. So when you're filing your taxes, you fill out an additional form, a T661. When you're doing your first claim You will probably have to wait about 6 months to get your money back on it, as the CRA is probably going to visit you and just make sure that you are a real company, and then we're going to do a little bit more of an investigation around it. In subsequent years, after you have a reputation with the CRA and you've had successful claims, you can actually get your refund in as little as 2-3 weeks after you've filed your T2. So it can move really quickly if you have your process in place. One of the things to keep in mind is there is a deadline of 18 months past the fiscal year end for you to claim. So we call it for the 2018 fiscal year. If you have a December year end, you will have till June 30th, 2020 to file for your 2018 period. So that is a hard deadline, and you cannot go back and file for that past that period. So do keep that in mind when you're doing this. You can only go back so far, that 18-month period, for you to capture the money. Just a little bit deeper into what we've created here at Boast. We've created kind of your SR&ED hub. We use the Google Cloud service where we connect with your different systems like Jira, GitHub, Asana, Trello, and we integrate all the data that's in there, and then we run some algorithms against that data. So we have a clustering algorithm that looks at all your tickets, and then we'll categorize those into the projects we think you can claim as a SR&ED project with the CRA. And then we'll also do some time estimations based off of the timestamps that we capture from a lot of these data. We're the only service provider actually in Canada that is taking a software first approach to this, when it is creating a lot of efficiencies for our clients, where they're saving 50 to 2/3 of their time spent on applying for the SR&ED program by using our software and our team. Here's another glimpse just at our process and how we're a little different than everybody else. You can see here typically what happens, and I'll focus on kind of the traditional market and what we're kind of disrupting here. Typically what would happen is Q1 past year, you'd probably talk to a consultant, and they would then ask you what you did 15 months ago and try to recall what was actually happening. You can see how this process is broken, where you're not going to have documentation, or you're not going to be even able to recall some of the work that you did. With the Boast process, what you do is you hook up, you set up your integrations, your road mapping, your user access, and then we do some, with the data mapping, we'll actually coach and train the data that we capture to match with the algorithms, so we have a better accuracy rate in our algorithms. And then we'll do check-ins every quarter to make sure we're capturing the data we need. So when it comes time to Q4 to actually complete the claim, it's a lot smoother process. It takes a lot less time, and we can actually get the claim submitted to the CRA faster, which in turn allows you to capture your money back. One other thing I'll kind of highlight on this, if some of the early stage companies out there are a lot of companies out there that will do SR&ED financing. So if you work with an incredible SR&ED provider, there are people who will actually advance you the money as a loan against that SR&ED refund that you might get in 4, 5, 6 months' time. Interest rates on those typically range from 10 to 18%, really depending on what stage you are, how many times you've claimed before. But another way where you can bring cash flow forwards, where that cash flow could be used towards sales and marketing, hiring new dev, or just extending your runway before you have to go out and raise money in a dilutive manner. And that was it from running through the Boast perspective just on SR&ED. I know there might be a million questions off the back of that, and happy to connect with anybody off the back of that. But I think at this point, we're just going to jump into Q&A and Q&A in general across both for Stephanie and myself. So if you guys have any questions, please pop that into the public chat here, and we can go through some of these questions at this time.
So just as you were speaking, I was kind of pulling up the chat here, and there seems to be a question in terms of which grants are compatible with SR&ED. So this could be interesting. I think I'd love to speak to the programs that I know more of, so the hiring, training, market expansion side of things. And then I would love Russ's opinion, because on the IRAP and NSERCs and MyTax and those types, I'm less familiar with how that kind of overlaps. So I think the key thing is that there usually is a stacking limitation with grants. And what that means is you could leverage, funding from one source and government source and stack it over another source. And usually they will allow for between 75 to 100% of stacking. So I know that, and I will say that it does vary from program to program. It depends essentially where the original bucket of funding stemmed from. And if it's from the same bucket, then it probably would be a little bit more challenging. So my experience with it is on the hiring grant side of things, they don't really care if you have a matching elsewhere. You just can't double dip. So if you're paying a developer, ease of numbers, $100,000 over the course of a year, and let's say you're tapping into 64% their full salary into something like SR&ED, you can then only claim the remaining portion that you would be paying out of pocket under that grant. So you would almost need to talk to your SR&ED consultant or your grant consultant, figure out what is the best way of approaching something like this. It might be that only a portion of their hours are going to be shreddable. So you would want to, ensure that you kind of get most of that covered under the grant. And so it does depend on the position. On the market expansion side of things, it's really interesting. So the way that the government works is there's money for kind of like in the ideation stage. So that would be collaboration with someone outside of Canada. That's not even R&D. And then you go into R&D, which is an IRAP and SR&ED. And then you go into, now you're ready to go into a commercialization stage. So the stuff that kind of overlaps in the middle would be the NSERCs and the IRAPs and whatnot. So I'm going to let Russ speak on that a little bit, because my experience with other grants is it doesn't usually overlap into the R&D side of things. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, for sure. So for example, with the IRAP and SR&ED, we have a number of clients that apply for both. And what you can actually do is there is a proxy overhead amount that you can apply to your IRAP dollars and still claim SR&ED on it. You can't double dip on the actual grant dollars received from IRAP, but you can mark up that amount and then get a refund back on it. So you can work with both of them. You just have to play with the numbers in terms of what the refund is going to look like.
Okay, good. And then there was another question in terms of, would we be able to share the slide? So Russ, are we providing this set of slides to the attendees?
We'll provide slides and a recording probably within a few days after the webinar. We'll be sending it out to everybody who's registered for the list. Yep.
Okay. You cannot take a success fee. How does that work with Granted as a Boutique? Yeah. So the question is, I heard that federal grants, you cannot take a success fee. How does that work with Granted as a Boutique service? So our service is kind of in two different ways. The way that we could work is where we have like a writing fee essentially on the onset, and then what we do is similar to the way that Bose has it, where he showed in his timeline kind of like a quarterly progress check-in, and then we can charge based on the progress reports that we would be assisting with. So that's something that you guys can think about as well. Is if you're working with a grant consultant, there will be situations where you can't really be charged a success-based fee. Sometimes they have some rules and regulations around what that actually means. Sometimes it's that you don't work with someone who has direct approval access. So you don't want to be, having a trade commissioner, for instance, although that would be illegal, to have them write it up and then submit it to whatever program that they're running. So just make sure that you're reading the fine print in there as well. Will you be sharing the 2020 grants out available for startups for small businesses? I'm going to do better than that. I am going to have you guys go into getgranted.ca and check out the list of grants yourselves. There's a free 14-day trial. Go in there, check out what the grants are. And I will say, keep in mind that grants are not, and I mentioned this earlier in the presentation in terms of how to fail, like it's not just what you know at that point. I mean, if we look at the government fiscal year right now, we're at the end of it. So what could happen is there would be something called slippage dollars. And those slippage dollars are going to be dollars that the grant program, let's say they had $3 million earmarked for a particular program, and they do the math as to where they're at right now, and people have, dropped out of the program, or just directions have changed or whatever it is, and now they've got $500,000 left. One day you might see it in the grant portal, and then the next day it's gone. And then 2 weeks later, it's back. And so always making sure that you have like full access to these notifications is the benefit of what Get Granted brings to businesses. So one thing is I would deter for organizations who are really serious about leveraging grants as an alternative funding source to just kind of go, okay, I'll just search my list and then find it and then apply and I'm good to go. Because the reality is you don't know what you don't know. Right. So I would encourage you guys to do that. It's free, 14 days. Go. This is my gift to you before the end of this year. Merry Christmas. And then in terms of what are the best ways to optimize your grant application? It really depends on the program. And I think this was one of the kind of questions that Russ, you and I were talking about different questions that usually come up. It depends. I mean, think about what the government is really looking to do. How are they looking to support organizations in Canada? What are their mandates? So if it is, for example, in employment, then you need to make sure that however you guys are writing up your grant applications speak to how many people are you going to be hiring? How long are you going to be able to hire them for? Are they going to be contractors or on T4s? And T4s are always going to be like higher ranked than contractors. Like I would say by 90% on the area of grants. In fact, some programs would not even pay for contractors on the grant side. They need you to put them on a T4 because it counts towards the employment rate, right? And that's what one of the government mandates. So it really is important that you guys understand what is this program looking to do, and that you guys, for all of you who are interested in grants, how is it that you're able to address those things in your grant application? Like write it out quite thoroughly and don't skimp on like, bullet points. I know everyone's doing this like 1-page business plan, 1-page business canvas. It's not quite like that with government grants. You don't have to write an essay, but you do have to give enough detail as to why you think that this would be successful and what you're going to do to contribute towards its success. How do you guys determine whether or not someone is a qualified client for you to take on a boutique service? Okay. So it sometimes is by company size. So we have 2 different levels of service, is basic, and then we've got premium. And so the basic level is you guys either do it yourself or do it with us. And then the next stage is where we do it for you. And so it really does depend on your grant needs, the years established, how many employees you have, and really where your business is at in terms of like growth. So if you're stagnant, you're like, hey, we're just hunky-dory, we're doing the same thing over and over again, we're not hiring people, we're not training people, we're not going into new marketplaces, probably less grantable. Maybe stuff for SR&ED, but definitely not on the grant side. So that's it does depend a little bit in terms of how we take clients on. And what we're looking to do is just serve the general business, right? So we're not saying you have to niche in on this like technology, or you have to be in food or whatever. It really is understanding what's available for you now, and then people can always upgrade to a different level of service later on. Okay, Rose.
Yeah, I'll just go from Bo's perspective. So typically how we do it, we are allowed in the SR&ED industry to do a percentage and a success fee. So based off of the refund that we get for you guys, we can take a percentage of that back, and the government is okay on that. Our fees range depending on the size of the grant. Can go from low single digits into the teens, just depending on the size of the company. The difference between SR&ED is it is backwards looking. You do need to spend the money first before you're eligible for the refund. So it is a refund versus a lot of other programs. You have to apply for it, and you need to be ahead of the curve and actually get approval of the grant before you spend the money. So it's a little different from that perspective. So what we do at Boast when we're doing it, we do free consultations to companies where we'll sit down with your development lead or CTO. We'll do a 20-minute interview where we'll get an understanding of some of the technology that you guys are working on, what your tech stack looks like, what you guys are building, and some of the challenges that you have and how you're trying to solve them. And from there, we can build out an estimate of what we think your refund might be, and then we can engage further from there. So if anyone would like to kind of touch base and get a better understanding of what the refund might be, do reach out to Boast, and we can definitely help you in that area as a free service, just to get you an idea of where that might be to help you with your future cash flow planning.
Yeah, and I will say, like, we connected with Boast as well, and for some of the stuff that we were doing, it wasn't immediately, shreddable, but it was really interesting to kind of understand a little bit more about what could be, right? Because there's the opportunity is that as we do more development, there might be other things in the future that would be, and so keeping those projects in mind, or those algorithms and things like that we're trying to do to improve the scalability of the system that we're doing, and I think this webinar, gave us the basics of it, is really important. Like knowing that this is something that you can actually leverage in the future or immediately is going to put you ahead of the game. Okay, and there's a question from Allison. Russ, does Boast take a percentage of the SR&ED? If so, what is the percentage? Do you want to answer that here, or do you want to consult?
Yeah, I kind of touched on it. So it really depends on the size of the company and the size of the refund. So as I mentioned, it can be anywhere from low single digits into the teens. So it really just depends on the grant. Happy to dive into it deeper, but it is a kind of a case by case basis with our clients.
Okay. And then in terms of the documentation process after the grant is approved, does Granted take care of all the documentation to ensure that the grant is eligible? I mean, that's kind of our job, is ensuring that from the side of research all the way through matching to your business strategy. And that's a key thing, right? Like I'm sure Russ will say this as well, is that you're never going to change the way you do business just because there's a grant or a tax credit at the end of it. Like you really should be looking at what is it that your company is looking for, and then be able to match the grant programs or the tax credits to that, as opposed to like, oh, I can do this and SR&ED will pay for it, or some of it, because there's an innate risk with doing business that way, and I don't recommend it. I think, Russ, you would also deter people from that. But in terms of the documentation process after a grant is approved, it really varies. I mean, some are going to ask for progress reports. Some are going to do progress reports for 2 to 3 consecutive years. Some will ask for, documentation to make your claim, and ask for surveys and things like that are required. Some will want a fully documented, what did you spend on? How did it impact the process? Give me the receipt for this. Put all the receipts in this kind of PDF file. So it really does depend on the program. And I can tell you this though, getting an approval does not mean you're getting the money. Like, I think that is a misnomer as well. I'm going to bust that myth right here. So just because you have an approval document, which literally is like a government contract that says, hey, I'm going to give you $30,000 for instance, you have to carry out those activities. So make sure that whether or not you work with us or that you guys have someone internally, that they're keeping tabs on when things are due, and so that you don't miss anything, because the chances are they're not going to let you retroactively claim for it, especially if the government fiscal year is over, because then they've had to do their books and they had to close it off. Are your fees based on a percentage of funding for programs that do not have a success fee restriction? So the way that we work at Granted is basic level services get granted, which is, a few $100 a year, $500 a year. And then you can either do it yourself or you can do it with us. And we're implementing a new credit system so that we can help in 2020 more companies leverage grants successfully. So some companies are like, I just need someone to check over my application. Or there's 4 grants on here. I don't know which one I should start with. Or, I'm hiring this one. What's the best program that you see out there for me? And so they have the list, but they still don't really necessarily feel confident. And so we're going to be able to help with that. And so that would be a pay-per-play. But separate from that is our boutique service, which is an annual fee, and then plus a success-based fee. And for those that we can't do success-based, then we would break out, whatever the cost of our time would be involved from the application stage all the way through to reimbursement. When you submit grants on behalf of the client, do you do it under the client's name? Or you're not allowed to submit grants under granted consulting unless it's for granted consulting. There's a full transparent process that's required. And I think with SR&ED, it is that case as well. Everyone has to sign off on the documentation accordingly. It would be a big issue if a consultant, and not saying that you have to work with us, but if you're working with a consultant where they're submitting things on your behalf, whether or not you know it or not, like, that is going to be a concern. But the reality is we've built in transparency processes within what we do to ensure that we're in alignment with the program's requirements. So that's something that's just, you learn it over the course of time, or they'll tell us directly. The programs will be like, okay, this is how far you can take it, and you can't take it any further than that. Are there grants for startups in the R&D stage? Haven't yet generated revenue, currently bootstrapping? Yeah, so great question. I'm going to let Russ speak on the SR&ED and maybe some of the tech grants on that side, or, programs that you know of on the startup side of things. I mean, the startup grants are going to be more limited. I will tell you this. There are always people come to me like, look at me, I'm a female and I'm a minority and I'm under the age of 30 and there's probably a pot of gold that I'm not accessing. Show me the money. And I'm like, yeah, no. I mean, you can do Futurepreneur. It's a loan program. You can do Women Enterprise Center, and you can pitch for the purse with former women entrepreneurs federally. There's a lot of contests that you guys might be able to do, but pre-revenue is a little bit harder. So I would look at some of the hiring programs, through some of the R&D stuff that you're doing. I would look at some of the tax credits, assuming that you can apply for it pre-revenue because you're investing your time into the R&D side of things. But yeah, it's probably going to be a little bit more challenging to get a huge gamut. And when I say huge, I mean, if you're expecting $30,000 to $50,000 in savings as a startup, it's probably going to be a little bit harder unless you do tap into IRAP, and then of course the opportunities that are available with SR&ED. Russ, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, my experience is SR&ED's a little different. They don't think about that because you're actually spending dollars. So it's a refund against dollars you've spent. So they're not worried about your revenue. It's just if you've spent money and you're eligible, you get the money back. Other programs do look at your traction, your cash flow, your burn, and some of your financial projections to make sure that they aren't throwing, call it good money after bad. They're not going to want to give you $100,000 from IRAP if they look at your cash flow and that's your last $100,000. They're looking to invest in companies, and if their objective is employment, they want to see that you're going to create employment not for today or tomorrow, but for the future. So there are a lot of other metrics that go into it. But SR&ED is the one where it's not it's just literally if you spent the money, you can get the money back.
But Russ, I do want to clarify that is if someone is bootstrapping and they're just putting in sweat equity, what would you say on the SR&ED side of things for that?
Yeah, so you do as I said earlier, it is taxes paid. So it's a refund against your taxes paid. So sweat equity doesn't count because there's no T4 issued. There's no invoices issued. So it is actually dollars paid. You need the actual expenditures in your company to get that refund against those expenditures.
Yeah. So for Calvin, your question, I would say make sure that you are registered properly. I mean, that's the case with grants and with SR&ED as well, to ensure if you want to tap into this funding program that you're doing things in accordance to how the funding grantors would want to see things. Okay. Special programs for Aboriginal women or other segments. This will vary, Craig. I mean, I don't think on the SR&ED tax side of things there's any preference to female tech companies at this point or Aboriginal. But are there Aboriginal programs? Absolutely. And are they grants or loans? I'm going to say some of them are they look like loans, but then they grace them a certain percentage back to say, okay, instead of giving us $300,000 back for the loan, just pay $100,000 or something like that, right? But they can't really necessarily call that a grant. It's like a contribution. For women business owners, I heard that there were programs in like Newfoundland and Nova Scotia for women to start up a business, and they would give them like $10,000 or $15,000. So if you guys want to move out there, start a business, and there probably is funding there. Probably a little less in the metros. Metro centers in Canada, and other segments like those with disabilities. I mean, there are a variety of different programs that kind of spring up every so often. We don't tend to work on those. They're considered more specialized ones, but definitely, the Innovation Canada site, you can probably filter based on that and see what programs are available. Some of them are not loans or grants. Some of them are, how can we help contribute by having you included in an incubator or giving you mentorship, right? Those are all things that on the dollar side, you might be like, what is that for? But a mentor, if you go and get their services, it's probably going to be $200-300 an hour, and you can get a mentor, based on kind of your needs, sometimes for $200 for the whole year. So you want to take a look at that and see, it's not money in your pocket per se, but definitely guidance that you might need as business. Are there any base costs to using Boast.ai platform?
Yeah, I answered that in the chat actually. So our software is free to use for all our clients, but we do because we're contingency based on the success of the claim, we do some due diligence up front and have intake criteria before we work with clients. So if you pass that, then the software becomes free to use as part of one of our clients.
Okay, so what does the contract look like? Can you start early stages and back out? Where can we read the contract? I don't know what contract. I guess
I think that was Roberto also asking just about Boast's software. So I mean, if we go down the road, I could definitely share a contract with you if you want to reach out.
Okay, and where can I find the Canada app? It's called Innovate Canada, and you can find it on I guess if you're logged into the Canadian version of your app store or whatever the Android version of that would be. It's called Innovate Canada, so you can just do a search for that. Or if you just go to Innovation Canada, Google, then you'll be able to find that as well. And then Colin wants to call out this New Ventures BC Hire a Student program to cover 10K to cover 50%. Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing program. There's some digital will programs, work integrated learning. There's other co-op programs that are federal as well, 5,000 potentially to hire someone who is male, and then, you know, female, 7,000. So that tops up over what Colin is offering here or mentioning here. So, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like knowing one program that's provincial, being able to compare it with what's federal for the same thing, both hiring students, you want to make sure you have those options and you know what's available out there. If you're hiring a first year student or an Aboriginal or a female, you know, it's up to 7K. I would take that. 70% of wages covered over 50% any day if it's the same thing. Okay. Cool. Are there any programs for a company wanting to spend money on digital marketing? So grant, probably not on the rest on the SR&ED side of things. It's all R&D stuff, nothing on the commercialization side. Is that right?
That's right. It is on the R&D side.
Okay. So I would say there is funding if you guys are looking to export. So opportunities for you to take your products outside of Canada, and the Can Export program would be what I would point you to. So it really does depend on your industry, what you guys are looking to do, the market that you're entering into, and just ensuring that you're taking a look at, you know, the cost of doing business in those new countries, and then you're market ready for export. So having an export plan, there's a lot of resources, export navigation programs and export, you know, I think some through the World Trade Center, they even have programs to help with export as well. So just making sure that you have that ready to go and then go into digital marketing. It's going to be harder for you to get digital marketing fees locally for domestic market because the government has to be like, why am I giving money to this Canadian business and not to this one to go and sell in our domestic market? But here's what I would say to that is, you know, I would look at grants a little bit differently in this case. One would be there's a grant to hire someone, a recent grad, to do your social media marketing stuff. So the opportunity is to leverage that grant to save half of their wages for the first 6 months. And it might even be something like a co-op program that Colin had mentioned here. Or better yet, take someone who is working part-time with you and train them up. Leverage a training grant and build that ability in-house. You might need, you know, some bling from a professional, and you want to make sure you pay top dollar for that. But then the basic things to do with social media and SEO and whatnot, that's all trainable. So if you have someone in-house that you can scale up and give them the opportunity to gain these skills, and you can get a training grant that will cover the education component of it, I mean, that's where I think you need to think of grants differently, right? Or you can think of the grants differently. It's not directly, oh, I need money for digital marketing. It's where is the funding? And how could I leverage it? And is this something we can manage? So those are all things to think about. Okay, so we've got 3 minutes. I think we did really well, Russ. What do you think?
I think so. Yeah, I think we captured a lot. I think we'll wrap it up there, but obviously we are around. Stephanie's around, so please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. You can contact her directly and have a conversation about it, or myself if you have any questions about Boast or SR&ED. Happy to connect with you and answer any questions you might have that are further from this. So I think that's it from there. Stephanie, do you have anything else to add?
No, just to let you know that the 14-day trial will ask you, as with every trial that you guys probably leverage, it'll ask you to hold a credit card in there just so that it's easier for you to transition into an annual or monthly later. So make sure that you guys just have that ready to go. And it's only available until the end of this year. Like after this, we're changing we're pivoting a little bit. So just keep that in mind. But thank you so much for taking the time, guys. I hope this was very fruitful for you. And I think Boast is going to do an amazing follow-up email with the slides and further information in terms of how to work with us. So look forward to hearing about the amazing grant stories you're going to share with us in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Okay. Chat soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.